Good morning to everyone. At the outset, I would like to thank Don Bosco Arts and Science College, Reverend Fathers, Principal, Secretary, the department head, and all faculty members working here. Also, very good morning to scholars and faculty members who have come from other colleges and universities, and good morning to students as well. So the first speaker has made it very interesting. He has taken you on a very interesting tour through, some of these theoretical trajectories, pathways. So let me see if I can measure up to that, but he has made it very interesting. So it's a very interesting topic, communication for change. Initially, I thought it is like communication for social change. In fact, Arul sir and I, we have been having discussions on this topic, and we were under the impression that this is communication for social change. I mean, maybe there is not much of a difference, but communication for change seems to be offering a lot of potential for us to engage with it slightly differently. I mean, how do we understand this? So I guess that is going to be, first of all, it's going to be challenging. So the title, to me, it seeks to discuss many ideas of communication. So if you look at communication for change, at once it appears as if the goal to be accomplished. What is the goal that is to be accomplished? Which is change. So change is what we want to achieve through communication. But that would mean communication is sacrosanct and communication is holy. So that is something which cannot be touched, and it is kind of fixed. It's not fluid enough. And its job is to determine what change is going to happen. So that is what it could possibly mean. So communication for change, looking at communication as something that is static and fixed, and change is something as dynamic and fluid. So to me then, I thought, okay, it is not necessarily so, right? So I think we need to first of all unpack, this idea of what is communication. So then that will open up a lot of, ideas. In the sense, then that will also help us connect with a lot of theories. Of course, there isn't much time for us to connect with theories, and Professor Arul Selvan has already, explained what are the, critical thinkers who you can connect with. So when I thought about what is communication, a lot of ideas might come, but one of the ideas that occurred to me is, what is the power dynamics involved in communication? So the question then one needs to ask is, who speaks to whom? So this is what Michel Foucault discusses, when he actually wanted to explain the idea of what is discourse, what is truth, what is, this power, knowledge. So there is a lot that, he has discussed. So truth is something, which depends on who's speaking, to whom, about whom. So there are a lot of these ideas. So communication then encapsulates, these interesting factors. What if, if it is one person, one group, one community, or one voice that is going to be heard, then can we say that this communication is effective, right? So we need to unpack communication, from a slightly different perspective. Now, this one voice may be very effective in reaching out a large audience, which is happening perhaps today, but to what extent is this one voice, one majoritarian view ethical, which he has already pointed out, right? So then it points us, so there is an ethical dimension, to communication. That's something, which we need to focus on. And around this point, Professor Ravindran, very frequently speaks about the feminist thinker Gayatri Spivak. Of course, we have, a lot of other people as well. So Gayatri Spivak once asked this very question, can the subaltern speak? Again, this question is connected to the previous question, who speaks to whom? So can the subaltern speak? So the question is it possible for the subaltern or the marginalized communities to have a voice? Because, when talking about communication for change, this change cannot come about unless we pay attention to communication itself and do something about communication. That's when, change can happen. So, we see a lot of these oppressions happening, all around us, right? So it has happened before, it is still happening. This again helps us understand that communication then is not neutral. So the first thing is, it is not neutral, and its politics or its dynamics needs to be engaged with. We need to kind of connect with, very intensely. In other words, it's not that we focus on change as an effect. When you say communication for change, change can be an effect and communication is the cause, right? I think we should not get trapped within this cause and effect relationship between communication and change, right? Because communication, it's in itself has to change, and it does. It is always changing, because firstly, the idea that we need to bear in our mind is that communication is not, something that is, static. So, which is again to say, they call it ontology, like, how do we understand what communication is? So, our understanding of what communication is should be, based on this idea that communication keeps on changing. It's not, the same. So, of course, in the process, there could be power institutions. It could be any institution in society. It could be family, or it could be the state, or it could be the corporate. It could be anyone who, of course, tries to control the flow of communication as to how how communication should flow. So, which is like people trying to sort of regulate the flow of communication, right? So, we have lots of policies as to, how communication should flow. So, we of course, celebrate content creators, we give them awards, right? And what kind of content creators we do, support and so on and so forth. So, there are a lot of, things that are happening around us. So, in this context, so setting, this as a kind of a backdrop, what I'm going to focus on is a very narrow dimension, which, I would call it as diversity, and how diversity is significant, for all these changes, to take place. So, a couple of weeks ago, I happened to speak to a former student of Pondicherry University. She had called me and she said she wanted something. She wanted to apply for some course or something like that. She wanted some recommendation. So I asked her, like, okay, fine, how is life, work, and where are you working? She said she's working at a firm which takes care of DEI, she said, which is diversity, equity, and inclusivity. It's wonderful because, these are terms which we need to engage with. As a critical thinker, critical scholars, we need to engage with all of these things. Is there diversity? Is there inclusivity? Or are we excluding people? These are questions we need to engage with. But on the other hand, when I probed a little further, what I gathered from her is that this is a company which is sort of helping other companies ensure that or establish this diversity in these firms, right? So they give ideas, they kind of do some counseling, so how to, make sure that there is diversity in a company, or how to ensure that there is equity and inclusivity. But this diversity, equity, and, equity and inclusivity are more to do with, yes, gender diversity, we need to talk about that. And abled and disabled, yes, we need to talk about that, but it stops there. Fair enough, it's doing a good job, but it's not taking care of or accounting for what I know as, other intersectional subcategories which we are supposed to be doing, right? Because especially if you are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusivity in the context, in an Indian context, it cannot end there, right? So you cannot actually treat gender as one homogeneous group, right? Everything as one homogeneous group, and forget this heterogeneity. Heterogeneity is very, very important, and we need to focus on, subgroups. So in this context, if you look at, media organizations, if you closely look at media organizations, and if whether they do have diversity in their newsrooms, for instance, or in any organization for that matter, you will find that there are stark, unpleasant, realities that unfold, from this, right? So many have already done, studies. For example, I think from University of Madras, there was a study. One girl, she actually tried to study what is diversity like, with respect to women and also with respect to marginalized and subaltern communities in, newsrooms. Actually, it matters a lot. And interestingly, around a week ago, I was also, getting my car washed at a workshop, right, as a water service station, and I happened to run into a professor from an engineering college, and we started having conversations, and eventually the conversation veered towards something very specific, which was, reservation. So he was talking about there should be no reservation for doctors, and so it just goes on and on like that, right? So I think, so we have this mindset as to whether there should be diversity or not. So even if you speak to people working in news organizations, they probably might say that this is how. So I'm reminded of Warren Buffett, right? You must all be knowing. He says that I don't want to have diversity in my organization, right? So that's how he says. So that's how people think about diversity. But I believe that diversity in media organizations will certainly bring about change. And newsrooms do not have much of diversity. There are lots of articles that have been written, including one from Madurai Kamaraj University. We can discuss that. So how do we understand diversity? So I'll just focus a little on that. What are the different forms of diversity that people talk about? Because unlike some of these digital native websites, websites which exist only in the digital avatars, in the USA and elsewhere, and I'm not saying USA is known for diversity, right? So they also have racism and all that. But at least some of these websites, which are at least bitten by the bug of social responsibility, have made it a point that the composition of staff in these news organizations should be published. So which means you get to know how many of them are women, how many of them are, for instance, Hispanics, or how many of them are Afro-Americans, how many of them are disabled, how many of them are queer, and other people from other sections of the society. They make it a point, right? So it's not that you're doing it for the sake of doing it. So it's not something that you do perfunctorily, they say, going through the motions kind of stuff, but you have to have a commitment, right? Yeah, so because why the question will arise, because most of the times whenever we did a study, on and with digital native websites, and we spoke to them, to find out what do you think about, diversity in newsrooms. And there are lots of journalists who said that, yes, diversity is important. Of course, they did have their own share of problems, because digital native news websites such as, The Wire, or some of these websites, they have their own, financial, they have their own business models in the first place. And of course, they say that they're not, for-profit, organizations. And as a result, they'll have their own financial, crunches. But still, they make it a point that, they induct at least one or two in this. But of all the digital native news websites, I could find only one which recruited someone as an intern and then absorbed that person as a journalist as well, from a tribal community. So why can't I go and report something that is taking place on tribal issues? Oh, we have seen that. The recent example is the Manipur incident, and there were lots of journalists who flew from Delhi, the capital, to Manipur and completely goofed up, bungled up, because it's very difficult to sort of connect with incidents that are taking place in this region, and as a result, you needed someone from the local regions, geography. So there are lots of reasons as to why you would need people from the different walks of life. So this diversity, I don't think any of these news websites, including the digital native news websites, let alone forget that these leading media organizations, they are not publishing, they're not furnishing the details of who is working, and the denominations, etc. Right? And even these digital native websites also do not have details. So if at all you want to understand, you'll have to speak to reporters personally, one reporter, and then find out if there are people working. And there are some people who don't even want to disclose the identity for fear of some backlash and stuff like that, right? Yeah. So what does it actually then tell us? That if there is no diversity, we can come to a conclusion that discourses that are going to be produced, because news is a discourse, right? News is not just a fact. So let's not, deal with as something fact and, objective. News is a discourse. Now, these discourses, right, are far from reality. They are not real at all if there is no diversity. So along these lines, then, some questions should be asked, right? So what themes are covered and what are underrepresented? So we have done that, even with respect to, media organizations, like, traditional media organizations like print and broadcast. What are the themes covered and what are not covered? What are represented and what are not represented? Or what are represented and what are underrepresented? What are prioritized over what? So and what are the different sources from which these stories are generated, right? So people talk about source diversity, like how many sources are you citing when you're writing your news stories? So that matters a lot, right? So we see that in television channels, these panel shows, I mean, they bring the same set of people to discuss everything from A to Z. You get to see only the same set of people. So you're not actually trying to contact, someone different and so on and, so forth. So the source diversity is very limited, right? As a result, if source diversity is limited, then what happens? Your viewpoint diversity will also get reduced. What are the different viewpoints, as far as a particular story is concerned? So that diversity is also, getting shrunk. So if the viewpoints, viewpoint is what I'm saying is what are the alternative discourses that you are generating, right? So if you don't generate, then there is only one dominant hegemonic idea that you are propagating. And that's what most of the television channels do today, right? Just one idea, and we also listen to it. And as a result, our exposure diversity is also getting shrunk, because, our exposure is also getting limited because the viewpoint is, very limited. And what kind of public sphere it will produce eventually. So that matters a lot. So diversity is connected to all of that. Of course, we know that all these markets are owned by a few people these days, right? And forget the fact that they also align themselves with A political party or B political party or the ruling government, whatever it is. But otherwise, all of them seem to be producing a same set of ideas and homogeneous ideas. So what kind of public sphere then do we get to participate in? What kind of public sphere do we produce, and what kind of public sphere do we participate in? So I think if you want to break this, we need communication that changes this, communication that disrupts this, communication that alters this. When communication can alter all of this, when communication can disrupt these arrangement, then what probably happens is that it alters the way we exist as humans, because we get to read and we get to participate in different kind of a public sphere where there is pluralism, where there is diverse news viewpoints as well. So this pluralism is very important, and which is very significant for democracy. I think that is something we need to work towards the current context, right? Yeah, so in this context, I would like to cite Dr. Balasubramanian, right, from Madurai Kamaraj University. I don't know how many of you heard about him. He's an assistant professor in this university. So he wrote an article in EPW, that is Economic and Political Weekly, very, very, long time back, I think, 2014 or 13, around this time. And he narrated the experience that he himself encountered when he applied for a job in a newspaper office. So he goes there, and the editor asks him, okay, who are you? What's your name? All right. So the question is very interesting. What's your name, and what is there in a name, right? So that's the question we should ask. So what's your name, and then what's your religion, and what's your caste? And he has published this. If you go to EPW, Economic and Political Weekly, you get to read his article. It's there for you to read. So that tells something like that there is a lack of diversity, and this also means that these news editors, for instance, or people working in media organizations, are not inclined towards, or do not have any disposition towards being inclusive, right? So I'm connecting to this diversity, equity, and inclusivity that these so-called firms are doing. You can make a lot of money out of that, right? You can become a good consultation company saying that, hey, I'll make sure that your company demonstrates that it is for diversity, equity, but this is not taken care of, right? So this discourse needs to be seriously understood. Yeah, okay, so I was just talking about the different, but there are a lot of people who have been discussing this, right? From the viewpoint of gender diversity, there are a lot of people, scholars, who are writing about it. Ammu Joseph, right, so one is an activist and a kind of a journalist who has written about the fact that media are dominated by men, right? So the hegemony of men, it's very strong. So you recently celebrated Women's Day also, so you must have thought about it and discussed it at length. So how do you make sure? So when I was talking to a few journalists, there are more of men I'm sorry, there are more of women working in these news industries, right? I mean, these are all digital native websites, like such as The Wire, The Queen, Scroll, and so on and so forth. How come that there are more women? So I was like, okay, good. That's a, a welcome sign. But then when I spoke to them, they said that men do not want to settle down for, measly pay, and these people are willing to pay only, smaller wages, and women sort of, I don't know, what are the compulsions, they have, right? That should also, change. But I don't know if that is producing a different alternative discourse, alternative viewpoints, right? I'm not sure. So I think people have talked about, diversity in this context a lot. Now there is someone, very interesting scholar, by name, so I've been talking to a few other journalists also, and they say that, hey, I can go and cover whatever is happening in tribal community. I'm well-read, I'm literate enough. So I think we cannot go by this intelligentsia all the time, right? So we need to have this emotionality also, right? So I'll say that, societies are now affective. Politics is also affective. Look at the way politics is being played out. Nobody is using any rational arguments, right, to sort of influence you. I mean, rational arguments are used, you will reject it, right? But people only attempt to sort of like hoodwink you by presenting some arguments that are mostly emotional. So, which means, how do we counter this politics? So we need to counter this politics only emotionally. So emotionality versus emotionality, right? So that's how, we should do it. Yeah, so, that's it. So, I was just talking to a few journalists, and they said that, I can do everything. So I don't think, we need to have someone from a tribal community to address their issues. I can be there because I'm well read. I studied in a convent, and my English is very good. I can, write colorfully. My feature articles will be very colorful, etc. But that's not how the argument, goes. And even the institutions are also like, they were little, what should I say? I mean, dilly-dallying, kind of not very, do not have very strong vision about, right, bringing about inclusivity, etc. So which is to say that the commitment is little, shaky, right? In this context, Sara Ahmed, there is a very great feminist philosopher again, who says that diversity is a performative commitment. And when she says that, she says there is a difference between commitment to something, which is like kind of a commitment as a noun to something, committing to something, which is a performative action, you do it. So doing is more, doing matters more than just merely saying, yeah, we commit to this, yes, we would like to have this, yeah. All of this should go, and it should reflect more in terms of, whether you have. So what is the action plan that you have? So that is actually, very important. Of course, we see, diversity taking place, I don't know, Kabar Laharia, that founded by, Kavita Devi, a Dalit woman, and Mook Nayak, there is another, news, website. Of course, I don't know how they are doing. I don't know the business models, but it's good that there are two women who have started these, news organizations, right? And that, the discourse that they are going to produce is also different. Like, to some extent, Pari is also not about this. Pari is not about, Pari publishes stories not about urban people, right? It's mostly about, rural, PARI. So in that sense, we need more of such, content creators, right? So, the word content creators has become a buzzword in the last 2 days or so. So we need more of this kinds of content creators, who can populate, who can produce a different kind of, what should I say? Yeah. So now, okay, this is with respect to media in general, but what is happening, when it comes to digital media? So how do we understand what kind of public sphere is getting produced when it comes to digital media? Because it's not production. So all along, what I've been talking about is like journalists and what kind of discourse they produce. So from a production side, right? But then production has changed in today's context because, you and I produce, right, content. So if you are participating in social media, I guess we are also producers, we are also consumers. And as a result, what is happening and, so the media's ecosystem will have to be understood, in a slightly different way. And in this context, we need to understand, what kind of public sphere is getting generated, and at the same time, whether there is inclusion or exclusion. The fact that I'm consuming content and I'm posting something on Facebook, is it possible for Facebook to exclude me, right? Or is it possible for Facebook to include me? So this is some of the questions I think we need to engage with, and here comes in the question of algorithms and so on and so forth. So connecting this argument of what Balasubramanian said in his EPW article as to the fact that there is no diversity in newsrooms. I would like to refer to the book, Race After Technology. It's written in a US context, but there are some ideas that we can draw from there. Of course, people like Sahana Udupa, right, and a lot of other people have been writing about digital public sphere. Francis Cody, one of the professors who is a close friend of Professor Ravindran Sir, and he was also the one who commented on Sir's recent book. I don't know how many of you attended this. Francis Cody is from University of Toronto, but he spends most of his time in Tamil Nadu doing a lot of work, right, trying to understand the public sphere in tea shops, starting from there, and today he's trying to understand public sphere in the digital space, kind of focusing on, he's an anthropologist, focusing on what is known as some of these protests that took place in Marina and other spaces, right, as to what is that all about. Yeah, so okay, these are people who have been writing about digital public spheres in the Indian context. Now, I'll first refer to the book, this Race After Technology, which is a book written by Ruha Benjamin. And so she is an Arab Muslim who teaches at Princeton University. So when she wanted to give name to her child, right, she was just thinking, okay, what name should I give? Because I just earlier said that there's a lot of things in a name, right? What name should I, give to my child? Because she lives in the US, right? And the US ecosystem is something different, where people having some names can easily be identified and categorized and can be profiled, right? So which is easy, This can be done. For instance, like, whether Facebook has a policy wherein it looks at a name. So Facebook, in the sense, the algorithms that we write. So it does it look at a name and then does it decide that, okay, the viewpoints of this person XYZ should be allowed to exist in this space, or should this be shadow banned? They call it shadow ban, right? Should this be banned? It could be temporary banning, but still it can happen, right? So she begins with this question, and she says then, okay, I'll take it as a dare. I'll give an Arab name, and then some other name, and some other name. So she gave a kind of a combination of names. So what is there in a name? And Balasubramanian also is talking about when the editor asked him, what's your name, what's your caste? There is naming, there is labeling, there are a lot of these things, all right? And therefore there is an exclusion. Please understand that, right? There is a naming, there is a labeling, and then there comes exclusion. So is there an exclusion, when you name, right, someone like this, someone like that, etc.? And you just bring this, naming all of that, to today's digital space, right? So I have a name, but my name exists in Aadhaar card, as Sir just mentioned. My name exists in passport. My name exists everywhere. So he was also just mentioning, like, about how, he has difficulty applying for leave. We have something called, Samarth portal, which is a centralized portal, right? So now I will be known as to where I'm going, because I have to upload, the CFP. So which institution I'm going, what paper am I presenting. So all of that can be done. So there's a centralized system. Now the moment, so, and then now you can correlate, right? Name and topic and, so on and so forth. A lot of things can be done. And now it's going to become all the more easier to profile a person, all right? So now name is actually something different. So it could be used to screen at the airports. Name becomes easier, or I can be monitored, or you can be monitored on the grounds of suspicion. So now what is happening? There is a sort of surveillance and control that is happening, right? Now this surveillance and control is also then resulting in sort of impacting diversity and democracy, etc. So somebody can be included, somebody can be excluded, and this is becoming all the more easier these days. And so interestingly, what do you use a name for? So I use a name, for instance, to address you, right? No, it's all gone. I use the name to assess you. I do a risk assessment. Is this person capable of committing this crime? Is this person capable of doing this, doing that, etc.? Right? Is this person capable of, producing a discourse which is not favorable to me? All right? So now I'm going to look at it, in that fashion, right? So it becomes kind of a, a data. So name now becomes, data, right? So now if you look at diversity, diversity is becoming a little more complex. It's a complex, phenomenon, right? So we are data, our names are data, and that can be implicated, right, in many ways. So we have a lot of politics surrounding names, and of course, this is an everyday conversation we have, a lot of, these things. So names, again, do not tell what is in the present, but names are used to decide what will happen in the future. What is this person with this name capable of doing what, So this is how you start, thinking. So this is what algorithms do. So eventually then, what is happening? We are getting profiled in specific ways. This is the profile. So this has happened, many times where we talk about, how algorithms are used, to predict somebody's, they call it recidivism, which is how likely a person is to commit a crime second time, third time, fourth time, and as a result, why bails cannot be given. It's altogether a different issue that, the Supreme Court asked all these judge courts, why is it that bail is not the norm, right? Why is it that bail is an exception? In, recent arguments you must have seen. Yeah, so, and bail is an exception, or to whom and norm to whom. Okay, these are all, different things. Yeah, so names are now not neutral again. They are not neutral. Names are not neutral anymore. So some names imply superiority that we always know, and some names do not, right? It's like somebody says this, right? So Ruha Benjamin is saying, it's like calling the queer by their dead names, even though they have their own names to choose from. So what is a dead name, right? Dead name is a name given to them by their parents, but on the other hand, they have their own names, but we use the dead names, to address them. So it's something like that, right? Yeah, so now the text system in this context is producing a digital caste system or a digital caste hierarchy by way of doing this is, what she argues. So it's a, very interesting, book. Of course, with respect to, diversity, are we able to produce a counter discourse, or, that's a question people ask. Of course, there are enough studies which, go on to argue that, yes, Dalits have participated, quite effectively in, discussions, and they are able to produce alternative ideas, etc. But then, to what extent, I don't know, right? So people have talked about it. So Francis Cody and Sadhana Udupa, both of them criticized this ideology that, don't ever promise that, the digital sphere is going to be possible and it's going to be egalitarian. No, it is not going to be. Francis Cody has, recently talked about public sphere, etc. So even 2023, he has talked about, he's published a book, something which starts with news event. If you get, you can look up, Francis Cody has done some interesting work from an anthropological, perspective. So now, what happens if, in this context, there is again some kind of, power dynamics that is, controlling this digital sphere. And as a result, digital public sphere, which we think, every time when new technologies arrived, people said that things are going to be okay. Now everybody can participate. All right, but then what has happened? This digital public sphere is also fractured. It is fraught, right? So in this relation, I will just talk about a couple of things. One is based on a study done by me and my scholar. So who studied? We studied the algorithmic recommendations, right? These recommendations, right? Feed recommendations, etc. So you use social media, or you use news aggregators, etc. So we spoke to a few women, and we spoke to Dalit scholars, Dalits, as well as we spoke to other minorities, and we spoke to everyone, right? So it is a a representative sample. We just asked them to sort of explain as to whether they understand what algorithms are in the first place when they are using these apps and stuff. And then we also asked if they are aware of the fact that these recommendations are produced in certain ways. So eventually then, there is one person by name Paridhi, I have changed the name. He posts something on casteism, and he posts on reservation, Dalit politics, etc. And some of his posts were regularly getting removed, from these spaces, right? Now it's very difficult to understand, how it's doing, because algorithms work, through a different kind of, functional. Right? There is statistics involved, etc. So whenever he posts something, it's getting removed, and he is present. He is present, but his articulations are removed. So there is a disarticulation. His politics cannot be articulated, but he exists here, and this is what Agamben calls inclusively exclusive. So Agamben says you are included in a political system, all right, as a member, etc., but then your rights are not taken care of, right? So he is there, but his viewpoints are not accounted for. So you see a lot of this, and despite that, and even women were also expressing this. Some of the housewives said that my husbands are getting what they actually want and what I like. Their likes have been captured and they have been profiled better. But when it comes to me, I'm being profiled as if I don't like cricket. Why is it that I'm not getting anything related to cricket? And why are you sending me only this stuff, right? So there is a kind of a mismatch. Then we asked them to game algorithms, which they did. But despite that, they still continued to get, okay, because algorithms work differently. Let's not talk about that now. And so what happens now? The public sphere that is getting produced. Now, what kind of public sphere will get produced, right? So now look at algorithms, what kind of public sphere will produce? Because you have to participate. Only few women said that they will withdraw from this. So today, people are talking about platform power and platform disentanglement. I want to sort of stay away from, withdraw myself from. And some of them expressed their interest in going back to reading newspapers, because they are not happy with this. There's a lot of frustration, right? They're completely discontented with this. They said, we will go there. At least there, the choices are, sort of limited, but still they can, decide. This is more like, Swayamvar. You are given, there's a burden of choice, and you have to choose one from that. It's more like that, right? So there is, this thing, right? So people are now talking about, so a lot of discourse is taking place in terms of how to disentangle. People are talking about it. So there's someone by name, Teresa, who I met somewhere, and she's written a very interesting book called Compliance Industrial Complex. That is, everything to do with algorithms, apps, all of these are expecting you to comply with something. Sir also spoke about, compliance. It's expecting you to comply with it. You talk about KYC, comply with it. Aadhaar, comply with it. Anything, right? You have to, become a member in CoWIN app, you have to comply with it. So there is a lot of this compliance. So is there a way out then, out of this? Come on, can we then, it's a, million-dollar question to ask. Like, I want to disentangle, because people are talking about power platform. There is recently, a call for papers from Digital Journalism, journal, which is like talking about platform disentanglement, platform power, etc. So that's, something interesting, right? Yeah, so if in this context, then I think, there is not much of diversity. We need to pay attention to this. So we need to then also find out how ethical. People are talking about AI ethics, algorithmic ethics, and so on and so forth, but I don't know what ethics is possible to accomplish. So it's happening. So I don't know if I should continue further. So with these little thoughts, I find that, okay, some of them are saying that they will withdraw, but most of them said that they will continue to engage with it, hoping that things will get better. Okay, next time I'll get better notifications. Next time I'll get to see better recommendations on my feed. So there's this hope. So you're investing in hope, right? Which is what another scholar by name Lauren Berlant, she writes cruel optimism. It's nothing but cruel optimism, right? You take loan from a bank and you repay the loans continuously, throughout your life, thinking that, tomorrow my salary will increase by 5% and which will be this much, and therefore I'll get this much. And so this is like, so you continuously, think in terms of leading a life. So this is what, even Lazzarato, there is a Maurizio Lazzarato, an Italian philosopher, he writes, the making of an indebted man, right? It's in a neoliberal condition, how is an indebted man, a man borrowing loans, is getting made, in which, algorithms, all these are involved, right? Whether to give loan to you or not, and there are lots of other things involved. So similarly, there is an indebtedness to algorithms and recommendations. Yes, I will continue, and eventually we lead to, it leads us to a slow death. So that's how, she ends it. Yeah. I don't know if I should end, there on such a pessimistic, note, but these are challenges. I think we need to critically engage with algorithms as well. So it's not that gung-ho, great algorithms, right? But on the other hand, we also need to engage with it critically. Yeah, with that note, I would like to thank, everyone for giving me this opportunity to present, my thoughts and ideas. Thanks for patient listening. Thank you so much.